Hello and welcome to a special edition of Q&A with James Maxwell. Today we've got a very special guest, an expert on gambling, and no, he's not an expert on how to make you quick money. He's an expert on regulations and how it affects people. Welcome, Jay Singh.
Thank you very much, James.
No worries. So today we'll talk about the Interactive Gambling Act. We'll talk about sports betting and how, who the head honcho is, what they do, and a few more details. Then we'll talk about how they advertise on the TV and computer, whether that's been effective or not. And then we'll jump into how there is the live betting versus the offshore live betting and how that's changed and how companies have found loopholes. And then we'll talk about how gambling is a positive for the Australian government and possibly Australia. And then we'll finish off with some recommendations for the government and how they can possibly improve. So Jay, we'll start off with the Interactive Gambling Act that was created in 2001. What is the Act and why was it implemented?
Basically, it was in 2001 is when it was introduced. It was made by the Howard government, basically to prevent online gambling here in Australia. Obviously, at that time, there was a lot of online gambling going on. People, going on websites and doing pokies or actual betting, whatnot. Now you see overseas, there's online betting websites where you can just, don't have to be, Australian Interactive Gambling Act prevents betting here in Australia, but you can still bet outside Australia because it is not an Australian product. There's fines that can come with this act, $220,000 for the individual and $1.1 million for the actual company. Obviously Australians, they can do this, get away with loopholes to do it here in Australia, but in the end, if you're doing it on an overseas company, the Australian government can't help you out if you obviously a problem occurs.
Yep.
During that.
Definitely. So we've found a video on the ABC and they've actually explored the same topic. So we'll show you a quick clip of that now.
Live betting using offshore sites has become so popular that the Australian Wagering Council, which represents many of the big online betting companies licensed in Australia, is pushing to make the practice legal.
Brilliant pass by Barkley. And in the end, Lukaku knocks it in.
Those offshore providers lie outside the normal protections that Australian law provides for consumers. They're companies who really operate in circumstances where they don't pay taxes, where they don't offer responsible gambling programs, they don't contribute to the integrity of Australian sport.
The current Interactive Gambling Act was written in 2001, before smartphones and laptops were the devices of choice for many punters. Betting has never been easier or more lucrative, and it's the huge potential earnings that live betting can deliver that's driving the push to change online gambling laws.
Transform your betting experience wherever you are in Australia.
They're going to make a lot of money, and this is all about making money. It's not about harm minimisation, it's not about the integrity of the sport, it's all about them making a lot more money.
Ian Fletcher from the Australian Wagering Council concedes the money could be as high as $2 billion.
But it's important to remember that that is not profit. Much of that goes in taxation, much of that goes in sporting integrity, much of that payments, much of that goes in race field fees, and much of that goes in other costs.
A betting update.
Hi everyone.
But some betting companies aren't waiting for the laws to change, already cashing in and exploiting a loophole in the law.
Thanks to William Hill, you can bet at any point during the game with just a few taps. It's so easy. A competitor even made a complaint.
William Hill's live betting feature works by allowing punters to place a bet with a click or tap, by simply turning on the microphone of their phone or computer.
It's that easy.
The practice was referred to the Australian Federal Police, which decided not to investigate, effectively allowing the company to bypass the
The
ban.
revolutionary new way to bet on live sport.
So now we'll move on to sports betting. So who is the head honcho of betting in Australia?
Here in Australia, it's Tabcorp. They're run about 2,900 stores here in the country, mainly operating in Victoria and New South Wales. Obviously, they're TABs. You can go down to your local TAB, make a bet on racing, AFL, whatever sport really. You can go to a pub as well. The idea, I guess, it's obviously the biggest part of betting in Australia. But yeah, it is. There's definitely problems with how they run their company, and especially live betting. Since live betting's obviously been recently outlawed here in Australia, it's definitely something that's they're still trying to find loopholes.
Mm-hmm. Before we get into the advertising, we'll show just a quick ad of TAB showing their odds and how it can affect people.
Juddy.
Carlton Richmond elimination final. And just bleed enormous.
Juddy.
Alright, so now we'll move on to the advertising on TV and on your computer. So why do sports betting companies advertise so heavily?
Basically, they're obviously money's the big thing. They want to make as much money as they can, and to do that, they try and get prime spots in some of the sporting events. Obviously, AFL, rugby, etc. Here in Australia, they want to get their promotion done before, during, and after the game to ensure they get obviously as much money as possible. But by doing this, they're also because sport is a family-friendly thing, it can have children being affected by these advertisements because they'll think it's basically a fun hobby that anyone can get into, and it doesn't obviously cause any problems. But as we've seen, there's a lot of addictions that can come with gambling, and advertising here in Australia has to probably be a bit more regulated to cater to those people that are especially younger people, so that they don't get into it and we start new problems.
Mm-hmm. So you've said here that there's some numbers, some big numbers on the AFL. What do they include?
So basically, 2011 there was a study done about the amount of advertising during a couple of AFL matches. Basically 4.8 minutes of each match was advertising. So ads are about 30 seconds long, but they're getting them in there as much as they can. And also NRL, they've got a similar year, 2011, 2012, they had 2.5% broadcast time was advertising.
Yep.
So they're definitely getting a good chunk of advertising in these sports. After a goal's kicked, you go straight to an ad. That's the first thing will probably come up is a sports betting ad.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose with those ads and the amount of time they do show, it could have some negative impacts on people. What do they include?
Yeah, as I said before, children are one of the big problems. They'll obviously be watching the games, and if they see these things, they might get a bad idea about it and actually want to do it in the future when they're obviously of legal age. But also, it can obviously a new generation of gamblers and gambling addicts can come through, which is not what we want. And the culture is just, even Australia is such one of the most highly betted places in the world. It's something that you don't want to have gamblers along with all this. You want to have a sustained environment.
Yeah, definitely. So through that, there's obviously been some outrage in the community, and they have some concerns about the ads that have been putting on TV, and they've put forward some ideas to the government. What do they include?
Yeah, so there was about 3 inquiries made by the community to the government. Basically, one was live betting. They wanted to reduce live betting and get rid of it altogether. They also wanted to obviously have the Interactive Gambling Act of 2001 updated, and also they wanted to get sports betting ads, the messages rather than on the sport betting itself, try and make it, as well as promoting the betting, also having a good message in it that's not obviously promoting bad health and getting into a gambling problem. And with that, they ended up in 2013, they ended up changing a few things. The government, most especially the advertising codes, they updated them to make them, the messages and ads more, less about the betting and more about the sport.
Yep.
And they did succeed in that part, but it's still not enough, I don't think.
Yeah,
by
okay.
government.
Well, I mean, following that, the government has recently put out a new advert about loving the game and not the odds, so we'll quickly show you that clip of that.
So my favourite sport is netball, but I also love footy.
I play basketball and football.
My team is Melbourne Storm.
St Kilda are at 350 this weekend.
Hawks to win by 10 points.
I bet you they won't.
It's pretty much a sure bet.
The Bulldogs were at $2.75.
It's just a part of sport.
Gambling advertising is changing the way our kids see sport. Let's help them love the game, not the odds. Find out how to protect them from the risks. Visit lovethegame.vic.gov.au. Authorised by the Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation, Melbourne.
Well, we've seen that advert and how the government's trying to change the views for the young people nowadays. Do you think doing this now is too late, or can it help these people growing up now?
Obviously, there is people who will be already been affected, but it's never too late to start. It's better to start now, obviously, with the advancements in technology. You'd rather start it now than later down the track when these problems only get probably bigger, I reckon.
Yep.
Children's behaviour will obviously vary, but some children will think it's okay to bet because they think it's something as a hobby or something that's just for fun, but it obviously can affect you financially and mentally.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll jump into how gambling can be a positive for the government, but I did some research before coming to chat to you today, Jay, and I came across something that was quite scary for myself, and it basically said that the government will not make harsher restrictions on gambling because they need to make some money off people gambling. They'll get taxed from it, so they, like I said, they won't make harsher restrictions because of that. So it's quite scary that the government will not want to help the country stop gambling and stop being addicts and all that sort of stuff. So it's it basically says that people are going to keep gambling in this country because the government want to make money off it, and I think it's quite wrong. Alright, so we'll move on to some recommendations for the government and what we think they should change or do. So I'll start, and I'll say that I truly believe that the government needs to understand that for people to survive in this country, they need to have money. And if people are problem gamblers, then they're not going to have any money to be able to buy a house, buy food, look after their families, and even more so. The government need to stop worrying about making money off our gamblers and think about stopping them from gambling and try and help them survive in this country. So basically they need to look after us because that's what they're here to do. And what do you think, Jay? What are your recommendations?
Yeah, similar to you, this is something that needs to be looked at more here in Australia, where obviously the interactive gambling is probably my biggest concern because it's so outdated compared to what it was back in 2001. Obviously they need to update it so it obviously regulates more towards the online gambling as well as smartphones and tablets, all that. And obviously even the advertising needs to be carefully looked at as well, because it's obviously the kids can be affected down the track. If they start thinking it's okay, then they can start obviously developing problems in the future, which we obviously don't want to have any further gambling problems here in this country.
Yeah, definitely. So I think those recommendations are pretty good for the government. Well, Jay's written a book, so if you want to check out his book, you can have a look at his book. It only costs $20, so it's pretty cheap. So thanks for coming in today, Jade. I appreciate your time.
No worries, thanks for having me.
No worries.